The early morning chill hung in the air as the sun slowly crept over the rooftops of Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Terminal 2E buzzed with tired travelers, suitcases rolling, announcements echoing, and screens blinking with departure times. Among the crowd stood a tall, dark-skinned man in a simple black hoodie and faded jeans. No bodyguards. No flashing cameras. No visible status. Just a man waiting silently at gate 37. His name was Ibrahim Traore. But no one recognized him, not the flight crew checking in passengers. Not the businessman barking into his phone nearby. Not even the Air France staff walking past him. They didn't know they were brushing shoulders with the president of Burkina Faso, and that's exactly how he liked it. Traore didn't believe in luxury. He didn't chase attention. When he traveled, he did it humbly, as one of the people, not above them. He was returning from a quiet diplomatic trip in Europe. The meetings were intense, talks of gold exports, Pan-African unity, and resisting neo-colonial pressure. But now, all he wanted was to go home. He walked calmly toward the gate agent, greeted her in soft French, and handed her his boarding pass. "Bonjour, CVA," he said warmly. She barely looked up. "Oui, you're in business class, seat 2A. He nodded, thanked her, and moved on. No red carpet, no fanfare. Just a man disappearing into the cabin of an Air France jet, unnoticed, but what Traore didn't know was that just minutes later, someone else would arrive. Someone loud. Entitled. And powerful in a very different way, and this man would decide that Ibrahim Traore didn't belong in that seat. Not knowing that he had just set off a storm, the automatic doors slid open and in walked Jean-Luc Moreau, CEO of a major French energy conglomerate. He wasn't just wealthy, he was used to power. From oil contracts in West Africa to political favors in Paris, Jean-Luc walked like the world owed him something. Dressed in a sharp navy suit and expensive leather shoes, he was flanked by two assistants, one carrying his coat, the other holding his documents. "Where is my seat?" he asked without looking up, voice clipped and entitled. "Sir, your business class seat." The agent hesitated, checking her screen. "Has already been taken. The cabin is full." Jean-Luc blinked once, then scoffed. "Impossible. I always fly business. I am a strategic partner in African development." His assistants shifted uncomfortably. The gate staff, all too familiar with this kind of arrogance, tried to placate him. They whispered, scrambled, refreshed systems. But it was no use. Business class was full. That's when the whispers started. "He's furious. He said he funds half of West Africa. He's demanding they bump someone." Jean-Luc's ego couldn't comprehend the word no. Rules didn't apply to men like him. "Make it happen," he barked. "I don't care how." One of the agents made a call. A senior flight attendant, Claire, was summoned. Tall, pale-skinned, red lipstick, and polished demeanor. She was the type who followed protocol, but also knew when to bend it for the right kind of passenger. She adjusted her scarf, clicked her heels down the jet bridge, and boarded the plane with one mission: find someone to move. And as she scanned the business cabin, her eyes landed on seat 2A. A black man in a hoodie. No watch. No title. No assistant. Perfect. She didn't know his name. She didn't care, but she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. Ibrahim Traore sat quietly in seat 2A, a window seat in business class. The plane hummed softly as other passengers settled in. He wore a simple black hoodie and jeans, nothing luxurious, nothing to draw attention. He scrolled through his phone, occasionally glancing out the window at the early morning light creeping over the tarmac. To the cabin crew and most passengers, he was just another African traveler, maybe a student, maybe a businessman. No one guessed that the man in 2A was the sitting president of Burkina Faso, and that's exactly how Ibrahim liked it. He believed in humility, in walking among the people, unseen and unbothered. No security team. No press coverage. No grand entrances. Just quiet dignity. He had just returned from intense diplomatic talks in Europe, negotiations about natural resources, sovereignty, and the future of the continent. Yet, as important as those meetings were, he was more eager to get home. To his people. To the land he served. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, offering drinks and smiles. No one gave him a second look. He preferred it that way, but then came Claire. She approached with confidence but a forced smile, her clipboard tucked under her arm. She paused in front of him. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" she asked politely, but with a tone that suggested suspicion. Ibrahim looked up, smiled, and handed it over. She checked it, blinked, and then looked back at him. Everything was correct, seat 2A, business class. But her eyes narrowed. Something didn't sit right, that he didn't look like he belonged, and in her mind, that was reason enough. She handed it back, smiled thinly, and walked away, but the real insult was just moments away. Back at the gate, tension was building. A tall French man in an expensive grey suit tapped his Italian leather shoes impatiently. His name was Jean-Luc Moreau, CEO of a massive European energy conglomerate with interests across West Africa, particularly in Burkina Faso. He was used to being treated like royalty. First-class flights. Red carpets. Doors held open. Heads bowed. When he found out business class was full, he didn't accept it. "What do you mean no?" he snapped at the gate agent. "Do you know who I am?" His assistant stood behind him, nervous but silent. The Air France staff tried to explain that there were no available seats. Everyone was occupied. But Jean-Luc wouldn't have it. "I am a strategic partner in African development. I demand an upgrade." His voice echoed across the terminal. The airline, desperate to avoid a scene, called the lead flight attendant. Claire, she was briefed quickly. A very important guest needed a seat. And there was only one way to get it: remove someone who seemed less important. Claire nodded and boarded the plane again. Her eyes scanned business class. There, in 2A, was the quiet black man in the hoodie. No assistant. No suit. No Rolex. He didn't look important. To her, he looked replaceable. She walked back toward his seat with a diplomatic smile masking a discriminatory decision. "Sir," she said gently, "I'm sorry, but we may need to ask you to relocate to economy due to an operational adjustment. You will be compensated." Ibrahim looked up slowly, surprised but calm. "And why me?" he asked, his voice steady. "No reason," Claire replied. "It's just a small adjustment for another guest." Ibrahim paused. Then spoke firmly. "I will remain in my seat." Claire froze for a moment. She wasn't expecting resistance, especially not from him. Her polite mask cracked slightly. "Sir," she repeated, "this is for operational reasons. I kindly ask that you cooperate." Ibrahim Traore didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He just looked her directly in the eyes, calm but unshakable. "If it's operational," he said, "why am I the one being asked?" "Why not someone else?" Claire faltered. The answer was obvious, but not one she could say aloud. Passengers nearby started to take notice. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A woman paused her typing. The tension was subtle but growing. They could sense something wrong, but no one spoke. Just silence. A strange, uncomfortable silence. Claire turned away and whispered with another crew member. Her voice strained, her pride bruised. She returned moments later and tried a different tactic. This time, she approached another black passenger, then another, only choosing those who didn't look wealthy or important. It was becoming clear. Ibrahim sat quietly, watching. His face remained composed, but his mind was working. Calculating. Listening. He wasn't angry. He was focused. And what he saw was worse than an inconvenience. It was a pattern. The final straw came when Claire stopped in front of a young African man in his late 20s and said, "You, sir, we need to move you." The man looked confused. "Why me?" She didn't answer, just held out her hand for his boarding pass. That's when Ibrahim stood up. Enough. The word carried weight. Not just because of who he was, but because of how he said it, measured, commanding, dignified. You are making decisions based on skin, not tickets. That is called discrimination. Claire looked shaken. Passengers began to whisper. A storm was forming, and Ibrahim Traore had just drawn the line. Claire's confidence was slipping fast. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the authority in Ibrahim's tone unsettled her. Sir, I'll have to ask you to sit down, she said firmly. Please don't cause a scene. Ibrahim didn't move. His voice remained level. I'm not causing a scene. I'm addressing one. The quiet around them grew heavier. Eyes turned, but mouths stayed shut. No one wanted to intervene, but no one could ignore what was happening either. Claire stepped back, flushed with frustration. She marched to the front of the plane, whispered with the captain, then returned with a new target. Not Ibrahim this time, but another dark-skinned man in business class. Then another. One by one, she pointed, always selecting passengers who looked out of place in her eyes. That was her mistake. Ibrahim didn't protest further. He didn't need to. He sat back down and watched. His fingers tapped softly against the armrest, not in nervousness but rhythm, like a clock counting down. The young African man beside him leaned in. Who are you? He whispered. Ibrahim only gave a small smile. Just a traveler. At the gate, the CEO finally boarded. Claire's face lit up. She greeted him with fake warmth, champagne in hand. He smirked like a king returning to his palace. I trust everything is ready, he asked. Of course, she replied, shooting a glance toward Ibrahim. The CEO didn't even look in his direction. As he passed, Ibrahim's calm didn't shift. He simply turned to the window, his reflection staring back at him against the glass. Outside, the plane began to taxi. The drama inside remained invisible to the world, but that was about to change, because sometimes power doesn't shout, sometimes it waits. The plane was now airborne, the world below a blur of clouds and vast lands. Inside, the tension simmered. Ibrahim remained silent, calm as ever. Claire resumed her duties, still trying to appease the CEO, treating him like royalty while ignoring Ibrahim completely. She laughed at his jokes, leaned in when he spoke, and even hung on to every word about his important projects in Africa. Burkina Faso is lucky to have us, Jean-Luc boasted with arrogance. We're bringing order to chaos. We're the ones who will fix everything. Claire nodded in agreement, still oblivious to the fact that she was insulting the very man sitting just 2 rows behind her. Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso, the very man who was leading his country to a better future. But he didn't speak up. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, a nurse from Bobo Dioulasso, returning home after years working in Europe, noticed everything. She shook her head as she whispered to her neighbor, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're humiliating." Her neighbor's eyes widened in disbelief, but they said nothing. Ibrahim wasn't the kind of man who wanted attention. He didn't make a scene. He just observed patiently. The hours passed. The flight continued, and as the plane began its descent into Ouagadougou, Claire's focus was still on the CEO, trying to secure his comfort. Ibrahim stared out the window, his face calm, but his mind sharper than ever. But the world outside the plane had already begun to change. As the plane descended, the mood shifted. The passengers looked out the windows, seeing something they hadn't expected, an entire convoy of black SUVs and military vehicles lining the tarmac. The sight was jarring. It wasn't just a few cars, it was a full military escort, complete with guards standing at attention. Claire and the CEO were oblivious, caught up in their world of self-importance. They assumed the convoy was meant for the CEO. After all, he was a big deal in the business world, and certainly someone of his stature would warrant such an extravagant greeting. The CEO straightened his suit, smirking. "Must be for me," he said to Claire. "I told you I'm involved in some very important projects here." He chuckled, clearly pleased with himself. Claire smiled back, eager to placate him, but the reality of the situation began to sink in as the plane taxied closer to the gate. The convoy wasn't for the CEO. It wasn't for anyone except the man seated quietly in business class, in seat 2A. the unassuming figure everyone had overlooked. The plane had barely come to a stop when a tall officer in a black beret boarded the plane. His boots echoed on the floor as he made his way down the aisle. The passengers froze, the air thick with confusion. When he reached seat 2A, he raised his hand in a military salute. "Mura President, welcome home." The entire cabin went silent. Time seemed to stop. Ibrahim Traore stood up slowly, his composure unwavering. The CEO's smirk faltered, his mouth hanging open. "President," he stuttered, his confidence evaporating in an instant. Ibrahim gave him a simple nod. No words, just acknowledgement, but the impact was undeniable. Claire's face turned pale. Her eyes flickered between the officer and the man she had so casually dismissed for the past several hours. Her hands began to tremble as the weight of the situation hit her. The silent authority in Ibrahim's gaze left no room for doubt. He was not just a man in a hoodie. He was the president of Burkina Faso. The CEO took a step back, his usual air of arrogance now replaced with shock. Ibrahim, however, was calm. He didn't flinch, didn't gloat, he simply stood tall, as a man of purpose, with nothing left to prove. His silence spoke volumes. An officer stepped forward, his tone icy. "You two will come with us immediately." He pointed at Claire and the CEO, making it clear that their time on the plane had come to an abrupt end. Claire tried to laugh it off, her voice a little higher than usual. "Wait, what? Why me?" she asked, trying to keep her composure. "I was just doing my job." But the officer wasn't moved. "You are being detained for questioning. You have publicly disrespected the head of state on national soil. This is a serious offense." Claire's facade cracked. She stammered, her words faltering as she looked around. No, this has to be a mistake." The officer cut her off. "No mistakes, just consequences." As they were escorted off the plane, the passengers could only watch in stunned silence. The CEO was visibly shaken, but his pride had already been shattered. The power dynamics had shifted, and they both knew it. Ibrahim, meanwhile, made his way off the plane, his demeanor unchanged. Outside, a cheering crowd had gathered, waving flags and chanting his name. His presidential guard stood firm, ready to protect him and his nation, the same guard that moments ago had been the cause of confusion and doubt. It was no longer just about the humiliation of a man in a hoodie. It was about dignity, respect, and the power of silent resistance. As Ibrahim Traore stepped off the plane, he was greeted by a sea of supporters. His ministers were already in place waiting for him, standing at attention as he walked toward the awaiting convoy. The air was thick with pride and unity. This was not just a return to his homeland, it was the return of a leader who had proven his strength, his resolve, and his commitment to his people. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, the consequences of what had just happened were starting to unfold. Claire and the CEO were both escorted to separate vehicles, their expressions a mix of disbelief and fear. The silence in the air was deafening. The arrogance they had once held so confidently had been replaced by the crushing weight of accountability. In the back of the vehicle, Claire sat, her head bowed in defeat. She had underestimated the power of respect, of treating people as equals. She had thought herself above it all, but now she understood that true power lies not in position but in the integrity of one's actions. The CEO, who had once boasted about his influence in Africa, now found himself in a place he never imagined. The cold reality was setting in, there was no escape from the consequences of his disrespect. His status meant nothing now. He was just another man facing justice. As the news spread across the globe, the story of Ibrahim Traore's quiet defiance and the humiliation of the CEO and Claire sparked conversations far and wide. Social media erupted with support for the president. Hashtags like #Justice for Burkina Faso and #RespectAfrica flooded every platform. It was clear, the world had witnessed something powerful. In the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were formally charged with discrimination and public insult toward a head of state. Despite the diplomatic pressure, Ibrahim remained resolute. "This is not a colony," he had said firmly. "This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice like anyone else." The incident would forever be a turning point in how the world viewed Africa's leaders, its people, and the respect they deserved. And as Ibrahim returned to his duties, continuing to lead with strength and dignity, the world took notice. The message was clear. Dignity cannot be taken for granted. It is earned, defended, and when needed, it is fiercely protected.